Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35th scale Early Production M4 Sherman tank. Unlike many of the other smaller scale builds which are found on my channel, in which those models are built for private commission and belong to a private collector, the model that you see here was built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, like I often mention in these videos, I take on commission build projects from vehicles ranging from 1/35th scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. The model here is built mostly out of the box, however it does feature several upgrades and additions that were added to the model in order to improve the overall look. We'll be going over these mods and additions in this video. First, let's take a quick walk around the model.
This vehicle here is the ubiquitous M4 Sherman tank. What differentiates this version of the Sherman compared to its later incarnations like the M4A2 or the M4A3 is that this version here is powered with the original Continental radial engine. This engine was originally designed for airplanes, however was also used in other military vehicles, namely the M7 Priest as well as the M3 Lee. These engines were very good performers, however, because of the demand of the airplane industry, other more practical solutions for power plants were to be found. And that's what led up to other variations of the Sherman, namely the M4A2 or the M4A3, which utilize different power plants. Other early features that this model has is that of the early 3-piece transmission cover, the more severe front angled slope, complete with casted bow hatch areas, as well as a dry ammunition storage system, and a low bustle single hatch turret. Shortly after these vehicles began to be fielded, some deficiencies in the design were beginning to be noticed. That being the location of the ammunition storage in the hull, the protruding driver and co-driver positions, as well as a thinner portion of armor located on the right-hand side of the turret. Both field modifications as well as factory-supplied up-armoring kits were developed in order to go ahead and remedy the situation. Some vehicles that were coming off of the production line received these up-armoring kits in factory and were delivered in the field in this configuration. The vehicle here is representative of one of those type of Shermans. Besides the United States military, this vehicle was widely exported throughout the Allied countries and saw lots of action during World War II.
Before I go any further with this video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the starter kit contained. And here's the model just prior to assembly. As you can see, the starter kit will be this Tamiya M4 Early Production Sherman tank kit. Now this kit here is a little bit dated compared to the newer kits on the market. These kits here originally came out in the mid-1990s. However, some of the tooling on the components date back to the 1980s. These kits here, I believe, are still in production and are still. The model here that you see was acquired off of eBay a number of years ago, and as you can see by the dust, has been sitting in the stash ever since. As for the basic layout, as you see, the box is your standard Tamiya white background style box art with the tank showcased in the center. Some basic graphic design, as well as some basic information about the kit and the vehicle type. Opening the kit reveals your standard Tamiya model kit. As you can see, everything here is still in its pre-sealed bags. This here is obviously the runner for the turret. It has all of your standard Tamiya tooling, which includes some rough cast texturing, as well as all the other components. Like all Tamiya tanks, this kit here assembles very easily and has adequate detailing built out of box. Considering the date and the age of the kit, it still, in my opinion, holds well with contemporary kits that are manufactured today. This here is an accessory runner, as well as the early components such as the early spoke style road wheels and the early hollow spoke style drive sprocket. Getting into the box takes us to some more early components, being the 3-piece transmission cover, as well as the side skirts, decal sheet, and other hull components. Getting to the upper and lower hulls. The upper hull at the time was the part that was some of the newer tooling, and it depicts that of an early style M4 Sherman tank with the more flatter hull angle and integral cast driver and assistant driver positions, which would be welded to the plate. As you can see, the model does have some weld detailing as well as some cast texturing, which again is a nice little touch for the kit. As for the lower hull, this here is one of the components that dates back to the M4A3 Sherman that Tamiya released back in the 80s. In fact, if you look here on the copyright information, you'll see it's dated for 1987. This hull here is still used on the current versions, or the more recent versions of Tamiya Shermans, and they do assemble very quickly. However, the one issue that these kits have is that if you notice, there are no sponsons. This is one drawback of the Tamiya system. However, sponsons aren't too difficult to fabricate out of strips of styrene. And here go some more runners with other suspension components, and again, these runners here contain parts from the 1987 M4A3 Sherman tank. A lot of these components here will not be utilized on this model. Digging deeper into the box takes us to the Caterpillar tracks. Like most Tamiya tanks, they are flexible vinyl or rubber material. They depict the rubber chevron style, and the detailing is very good for the tooling and the material that the tracks are molded in. These tracks will be utilized on this kit. Finally, towards the bottom of the box takes us to the instructions. Typical Tamiya, which, needless to say, are very well done, very thorough, and are most of the time accurate from my past dealings with Tamiya tanks. All in all, this model here will be a nice, simple, and fun build. And to quickly show that the parts are the same, here I have a 1987 release Tamiya M4A3. And here goes the lower hull of this kit compared to the version released from the 1990s. As you can see, it is the exact same tooling. This also applies to the other runners that we have here. Starting with the model's suspension lower hull, all of the running gear and suspension components that you see here are kit supplied and were assembled out of box with no mods necessary. The kit components assemble easily and effortlessly. One area on these kits to keep in mind of is, though, that of the sponsons. Like what was mentioned in the earlier unboxing scene, these older style Tamiya Sherman tank kits are absent of their sponson detailing and structure. This is a bit of a ding on these older style Tamiya kits, but is one that can be remedied. On the model here, I went ahead and fabricated the missing sponsons out of pieces of sheet styrene. The sponsons run from the bow all the way to the rear portion of the kit. If I remove the turret, you can see the added sponsons a lot better. In addition to cutting two thin rectangular pieces of sheet styrene to bridge the gap further, I went ahead and also glued on a piece of Plastruct angle. The angle helps as a brace and really supports the plastic piece that connects the upper hull to the lower hull. In addition to adding structure, the piece will also give a nice point to add putty in order to sand down the side of the hull, which will eliminate any seams that may be present. With the addition of the sponson, the kit is greatly improved in boat accuracy as well as also structure. It feels a lot more rigid compared to the sponsorless out of the box variant. While on the lower hull, it's a good time to mention that since this tank is a VVSS equipped Sherman tank, there are some certain key features to paint on these type of parts which are commonly overlooked or painted incorrectly on a lot of other modelers' smaller scale builds, namely that of the road wheels. As you can see, like most American tanks, the Sherman does feature a rubber rimmed road wheel. Now the rubber rimmed are found on the road wheels only. As for the return roller and the rear idler wheel, these are not rubber rimmed and are actually steel. It is a common error to see on smaller scale builds where people would take black paint and add a false rubber tire to the idler as well as the return rollers. This is not present on the VVSS Shermans, and if done, is incorrect. The best way to paint these components is to paint the components with a little bit of silver or steel paint on both the rollers, the idler. Also, a little brush of the same paint along the skid rail is another tip to greatly help the look of the model. As of note, the only Sherman tanks that do have rubber rimmed parts on these wheels would be tanks equipped with the HVSS suspension, but not the VVSS suspension like we have here. Moving on to quickly discuss the tank's tracks. Like I mentioned before, the tracks that come with the kit are adequately detailed, paint and assemble and install also easy and effortlessly. Now, while on the subject, it's important to note that on a lot of smaller scale builds I have seen, modelers commonly misrepresent on what the track's materials are and overweather or weather incorrectly these components. The tracks that are found on this Sherman tank here are representing that of the rubber chevron style. These tracks comprise out of three pieces. You have a center pad and two wing connectors. The center pad is one block of rubber, and the two wing connectors are comprised out of steel pieces. It's important to paint and weather these components accordingly, as if painted and weathered incorrectly also hurt the look of the model. Moving our way to the front of the vehicle, first takes us to the bow fenders. Like all corresponding versions of the Sherman family, the Sherman fenders are made out of sheet metal and have two small vertical braces for rigidity. These components are somewhat molded in with the kit. They are a lot thicker than the versions you see here and are designed to have a piece of plank glued across in order for you to add crew equipment to the front of the vehicle. As you can see on my model here, that crew equipment was not added, so the chunky plastic blocks that were in place were deleted, and newer, more to scale versions were fabricated out of thin strips of brass. Along with the vertical brace, there's also a horizontal brace which runs along the transmission cover to the end of the brush guard. Moving up from the transmission cover takes us to the bow headlight brush guards. Like typical on all of my Shermans, I always add the little canisters which are found on either side of the brush guard. And moving to the 1919 machine gun, a mod from the kit original was that with a small micro bit, I drilled out the muzzle end of the bow machine gun. Towards the rear of the vehicle, it's basically all stock. While on the tools though, it's important to point out that on American vehicles, the tools are held in place with both metal clips as well as leather or canvas straps. By simply knowing which components are which are molded into the tools, greatly helps the look of the build when painted properly. As you can see, the metal clips are painted the color of the model or the color of the vehicle, while the actual straps themselves are painted with a khaki color. This also helps the model pop and gives it for a little bit more of a realistic look. Moving our way to the fluid filler caps. Like I also mentioned on my Sherman builds, I like to add little drainage holes, which are present on these components here. On this style of M4 Sherman, you would have 2 on the corner, as well as 2 on the top bullet splash guard. This is a mirror image on the opposite side. Now, like I mentioned in the 1/6 scale tank videos, there are several different options and styles that were available and done by the different manufacturers, and these styles here can be found with a little bit of research on the internet as for which style works best for your build and also works best for your personal taste. Moving our way to the tank's turret. Tank's turret that you see here is built again mostly out of the box. The only few noteworthy mods to mention are, like with the bow 1919, with the coaxial 1919, I went ahead and drilled out the barrel end of the weapon. The same feature was also done on the turret mounted M2HB, as well as the front sight of the 50 caliber as well. Moving to the back takes us to the MP48. Just like with all of my American tank builds, the center portion of the MP48 spring antenna base is made out of porcelain and is best replicated with a glossy amber color. As for the antenna wire itself, the wire has its 2 end connectors present, or in this scale are just simply painted onto the wire itself. The portion that makes contact with the MP48 is painted in blue, and the portion all the way on the end of the connector is painted in red. Also, if we notice on the back portion of the turret is a small drainage hole on the antenna well. Again, this is also present on the real vehicle, and also when added to the model, helps the look. On the opposite side of the turret takes us to the vane side. As you can see here, the top portion is highlighted with red. I've seen this feature done on several real Shermans and added it to the vehicle that you see here. One nice feature that the Tamiya kit does have, though, is that the turret periscopes can be molded in the open or closed state. They are separate pieces, and since they are separate, makes painting the lens as well as the actual plastic frame of the periscope a lot easier. On this side of the turret here, as you can see, is the smoke mortar, and with a little poof of black paint simulates powder fouling, which also again is a nice little tip for improving the look of your Sherman. As for the rest of the detailing on the tank's 50 caliber machine gun, the kit itself is built again out of box. The detailing on these Tamiya 50s is adequate for the scale. One tip though is on the ammo belt. You can paint it like the way I have it here, and best simulates that of a real linked 50 caliber ammo belt. You have the brass painted for the shell casings, you have the copper painted full metal jackets, and in the center you would have the links, which would be a dark black or a dark gray coloring. By simply adding that, again, helps the look of the build. As for the grips, like I always do on my smaller scale builds, they are represented to be that of a brown Bakelite, which was a common material, again, used for weapon grips of the period. As for the model's paint and markings, the model is replicating a M4 Sherman that would have been found in Normandy in August 1944, just around the time of the breakout. As for the camouflage pattern, as you can see, the tank utilizes several broad bands of red-brown paint, which were airbrushed or spray gunned directly over the tank's base of olive drab. As for the markings itself, the markings that you see here are all kit applied, and needless to say, were very high quality and went on again easy and blended well with the paintwork. Decals like this are staple on Tamiya kits. It's also important to note that the vehicle does offer several different variations of markings and camouflage in order to depict the vehicle and a few other alternatives compared to the version that you see here. As for the build itself, I'm quite happy at the way the whole model turned out. These Tamiya kits are just known to be awesome builds. They go together very easily. The detailing on them is pretty good for a base material and does leave room for several additions and modifications, which can be added at the discretion of the builder. In addition to the markings and the paint, there are also several other options that this kit has that can be added or withdrawn in order to further customize and tweak the tank to a certain style or type of look that the modeler is representing. This being that of the applicate hull armor. By simply removing these pieces, you actually have a different style of Sherman. So literally with the same base kit, you can build about 3 or 4 different styles of the same type of tank. Combine this with different type of patterns, markings. These vehicles are almost infinite with the amount of possibilities that you can build them as. As for a difficulty, these vehicles here can be built by a wide range of audience. Anywhere from a beginner that may have had 1 or 2 builds under his belt, all the way up to an experienced modeler. Some of the advantages that this kit offers is first, the subject matter. This version of the Sherman was so heavily used by not only the United States Army, but was also heavily shipped abroad to countries like Canada, as well as England, and even the Chinese Army used them in Burma. Because of that, there are so many different variations in both details, camouflage pattern, and markings that it can keep the modeler busy on just modeling variations of this style of Sherman for years to come. In addition to the rich, dense background that this tank has, the kit itself is also very prolific. They can be found very easily on the internet as well as in local hobby shops. Because these kits are so common and I believe are still in production today, their costs are also going to be very affordable. The base starter kits can be found from anywhere between $20 to about $40 US. In addition to the other advantages, the kit also has a very large aftermarket supply pool, in which there are tons of aftermarket add-ons in both resin, metal, and even photo etch to further enhance the build from the way you see it here from the basic kit original. Just like with the real Sherman tank itself, these Tamiya M4 kits assemble very quickly, so building one will not be a very laborious task. And furthermore, you cannot have a tank collection or consider yourself a model tank collector without having at least one M4 Sherman in your collection. And that concludes this model showcase video for this 1/35th scale early production M4 Sherman tank. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, and don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thank you.